over the dark night. She reached up to the sky of stars and caught the red-hot light of the North Star.
Well, greetings and welcome back as always, and thank you all so much for your patience. You know, as a result of the great Black migrations north and west, a number of American urban centers became homes to thriving Black communities. What roles did Black churches and other entities play in developing and supporting these communities during their development and the industrialization of these urban centers? And what roles do they play today as American urban centers have been deindustrialized? Let's connect some dots and find out.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.
Welcome to the Connecting the Dots podcast with Dr. Wilmer Leon, and I am Wilmer Leon. With each show, my guests and I provide insight and analysis into current events and the broader historical context in which these events take place. I want to quickly look at a couple of today's headlines. Trump calls for using U.S. cities like Chicago as a, quote, training ground, end quote, for the military. On Tuesday, he proposed using American cities as training grounds for the armed forces and spoke of needing U.S. military might to combat what he called the, quote, invasion from within, end quote. Quote, we should use some of these dangerous cities as training grounds for our military. We're under an invasion from within, no different than a foreign enemy, but more difficult in many ways because they don't wear uniforms. It seems that the cities that are run by the radical left Democrats, what they've done to Chicago, San Francisco, New York, Los Angeles, they're very unsafe places, and we're going to straighten them out one by one. And this is going to be a major part for some of the people in this room, Trump told a group of flag officers. He said, that's a war too. It's a war from within. Here's the, let's see if we had the video. Here's the president.
With many of you in the room, we've brought back the fundamental principle that defending the homeland is the military's first and most important priority. That's what it is. Only in recent decades did politicians somehow come to believe that our job is to police the far reaches of Kenya and Somalia, while America is under invasion from within. We're under invasion from within.
And an unfortunately related story. ICE agents repelled from Black Hawk helicopters in Chicago for major raid. Federal agents repelled from Black Hawk helicopters onto the rooftops of Chicago residential buildings today, launching a sweeping immigration enforcement operation targeting suspected Tren de Aragua gang members. The operation, led by ICE with the support of the FBI and U.S. Border Patrol, was designed to apprehend so-called high-priority targets allegedly connected to the Venezuelan crime syndicate that U.S. authorities have accused of trafficking, violence, and other cross-border crimes. And finally, judge issues blistering opinion against Trump policy to deport pro-Palestinian students. The judge ruled non-citizens have the same free speech rights as U.S. citizens under the First Amendment. William G. Young, a Ronald Reagan appointee, called the case, quote, perhaps the most important ever to fall within the jurisdiction of this district court. This case squarely presents the issue whether non-citizens lawfully present here in the U.S. actually have the same speech rights as the rest of us, he wrote. The court answers this constitutional question unequivocally, yes, they do. On today's episode, the issue before us is, what role did Black churches and other entities play in developing and supporting Black communities during their development and the industrialization of our urban centers, and what roles do they play today as American urban centers have been de-industrialized? My guest is an organizer with Philadelphia's Saturday Free School, an internationally renowned Du Bois scholar, a community educator and activist, Dr. Anthony Monteiro. Tony, as always, welcome back.
Thanks a lot, Will. It's great to be with you.
Before we get to your work, I wanted to get your thoughts on Trump's Tuesday speech, his reference to the enemy within, and using urban centers as training grounds for the military.
Well, that's quite a bit to talk about at one breath. But anyway, the speech on Tuesday, before it looked like 1,000 top-ranking military leaders from all of the services, was one with his speech at the Charlie Kirk Memorial and his UN speech. They are all spectacles, and they show a certain incoherence and an inability on his part to grasp the full nature of the crisis that the nation faces. First of all, he doesn't proceed with a strong hand, at least from the standpoint of support among the people. And I'm not just really talking about him. I'm talking about those polls that show that 60% of the American people say that the political and economic systems have to be radically reformed, with 15% of them saying that they need to be uprooted and something new built. 80% of the American people say in one or another way in polls that the government does not represent them. Does the country have severe problems? Yes. The greatest problem is the fact that the government and the ruling elite do not enjoy the support of the people in domestic or foreign policy. And I think the coup de grace of all of this is that the American people are now in their majority rejecting Israel, with the majority of people supporting the Palestinians. The ruling elite, including the Trump administration, proceed from a very weak position. And hence, Trump has attempted to substitute spectacle and literally nonsense and threat for a coherent policy to address the concerns of the American people. And by the way, inflation is still rising. Electric bills, especially in those parts of the country where they're building these AI data centers, electric bills have gone up nearly 300% in some communities. So what is he talking about? What is he trying to say? He wants to deploy the military? Well, the question is, do those generals and admirals who were in that room in Quantico, Virginia, would they agree with being deployed to suppress or to control the population of the country? I don't think so. I think we're in a huge crisis. The Trump presidency, these first 9 months, have only sharpened the crisis. And I think, as I've said to you before, that the Trump presidency may be in its weakest moments and might be on the cusp of unraveling.
In 1899, Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois published the first sociological and epidemiological study of African Americans in the city of Philadelphia. It was entitled The Philadelphia Negro.
Yeah.
You and your colleagues at the Saturday Free School in Philadelphia have embarked upon what I would characterize as a similar path. Did I frame the issue properly in the open, and am I summarizing it properly now?
I think you are. I think, what we're looking at is a Black social system that emerged from the Great Migration, the first Great Migration, between something like 1890 and 1930. I'm in Philadelphia. The majority of those who ended up in Philadelphia were coming from South Carolina, but they were also coming from North Carolina, Georgia, Virginia. After arriving in Philadelphia, they sought housing, they sought jobs, but they also began to build a social system, a Black social system, which constituted a system of resistance to what in effect was a white supremacist social system. The central institution in this social system was the Black church. Now, these new migrants to places like Philadelphia established different kinds of churches than, for example, Mother Bethel AME Church, which was founded in the 1790s and was studied by Du Bois in the Philadelphia Negro. These new religious institutions were like the United House of Prayer for All People, which was led by a man by the name of Daddy Grace. The Peace Mission, led by Father Divine. The Moorish Science Temple, led by Noble Drew Ali. The Nation of Islam, led by Elijah Muhammad, and others, all of which are formed around 1930, 1931, 32, and they're written about in a very small but very important sociological study by Arthur Fawcett called Black Gods of the Metropolis. Our first line of defense in a crisis like this has always been organization and the strengthening of the institutions of the Black community and of the Black social system. Now, what we're doing here in Philadelphia is studying these institutions not in their infancy, but in their maturity under conditions where Philadelphia, and in particular North Philadelphia, has been ruthlessly deindustrialized over the last 40 years. This has produced an unbelievable and unprecedented crisis of the Black community in Philadelphia. And so the question becomes, what are the mechanisms of resistance, of fight back, and of upholding the rights of our people to defend themselves in whatever ways that they have to, but to move forward against what seems to be a government that wishes to impose its will upon the people of the country, but in particular Black people.
As you went down the list of churches you were studying, I know that most of those churches, if not all of those churches, had and have congregations in a lot of other cities. They're in Washington, D.C. They're in Pittsburgh. They're in New York. So talk about some of the similarities that you understand there to be between how these institutions developed in Philadelphia and how they developed in other urban centers.
Yeah, well, the significant thing is that they constitute the building of a social system,
Mm-hmm.
A Black social system, which is the alternative to the white supremacist social system. In other words, from a sociological standpoint, what we have to understand about Black folk is that in the main, in their majority, Black people have never sought individual solutions as much as group solutions.
Mm-hmm.
And as such, have sought to build up social relationships based upon their churches, their religious institutions, their education institutions, their Masonic and other fraternal Soros institutions, and such. Black people are highly organized in general. And from a sociological standpoint and from a revolutionary standpoint, if we are to resist the worst devastation of this current crisis, it will be through our organizations. Now, of course, if you take Father Divine, the United House of Prayer for All People, if you go to their churches in Washington or New York or Philadelphia or Chicago, they will tend to be very similar. The way they pray, the way they deploy music, and things like that are similar in all of these places. On the other side, if you take the Nation of Islam, while different in its practices, in many of its beliefs, they tend to fulfill a similar function. Fawcett referred to these religious institutions of the most recent immigrants to the large cities as Black gods of the metropolis. Now, why are these Black gods important? I think, first of all, because the gods of Black people, that is, their beliefs in perfection, in beauty, in art, in freedom, are different than the white gods of this country. Black gods are the gods of Black people, and they are part of what we might call the history of consciousness of Black people, of their struggle to know the world, to change it, and to resist the worst features of white supremacy. You know, that's why the civil rights movement is inconceivable without the Black church. I would say, going forward, that all attempts to create alternatives, be they political parties or revolutionary and underground military organizations, and so on, have never been as successful as the Black church in producing the type of resistance, of struggle. So the Black church and affiliated institutions are the key, even in the 21st century, and even under conditions of this crisis, to Black people, and how we will advance, and how we can and must provide leadership to a good part, not only of Black people, but of white people, of Latinos, and others.
You put this in the context of the group dynamic versus the individual.
Right.
And you and I have talked many times. I'm sure you've heard me talk about, I always framed it in the context of the collective dynamic versus the that our success as a people has never been won individually. It always has come through the power of the collective, the souls of Black folk, not the soul of some guy. Mrs. Hamer sacrificed greatly so that we could vote, not so that she could vote. Right. And that, in a political dynamic, really is counter to the American established process. Republican politics is based upon the individual, and to a great degree, even though Democrats will tend to support more social programs than others, still it's about the American, acquiring the American dream for the individual. Talk a little bit more about why that is so significant in our community.
Well, because there are no real individual solutions in our community. Either we're all going to get close to what we call freedom, or very few of us will. There are very few individual options, as many in the upper middle class, the professional classes, and the petty bourgeoisie have found out. That unless the nation is changed in fundamental ways, it is hard to conceive of full freedom for Black people. This notion that Black people will fight upon terms that they choose, they will proceed from their gods, as it were, that they will mobilize through their institutions. Now, you mentioned the Democrats supporting social programs. In some ways, that is true. In other ways, they have also supported some of the most repressive legislation that affects Black people, like the Crime and Anti-Terrorism Act of 1994, which locked up 1/3 of young Black men, devastating socially and economically the Black community. The Democratic Party has been more cynical in attempting to use the Black church for their own purposes, mainly for elections, and have in some ways the fact that politicians have been allowed to come into sacred spaces and use them for the purposes of advancing a political party rather than advancing the liberation of Black folk. This has damaged trust that most Black people would have in religious institutions and leaders of religious institutions, and thus we see a falling away from churches as such, because they resent this kind of use of the church for politics. But they do not resent the use of the church for the collective freedom of Black people. And one of the claims that we try to make in Philadelphia, or that we're researching in Philadelphia, is how in this time of crisis of an entire political and economic system, what can Black people do? Can we do what we did in the 50s, 60s, and 70s? Can we be mobilized to be a vanguard of a people's movement, not unlike or very similar to what King and those developed in the 50s and 60s? Can we have something analogous to a Montgomery bus boycott that triggers a great movement for social change? We think that capacity exists, and we think that more research and understanding of Black people is necessary if we wish to understand how we navigate this transition away from political and what is called political normality and the elite domination of ideas and politics. If in this crisis we can use this as a moment of transition to something new. In other words, can the Black church be the revolutionary force that it was in the 1950s and 60s? Can the likes of a Rosa Parks and a Martin Luther King and a Coretta Scott King and a Diane Nash as representatives of something new? I could say more. I think in this moment of collapse, Black people cannot defer to individualism. We must build up every institution, strengthen every institution of the Black community, even when it demands a deep ideological struggle, even if it requires that certain leadership styles be rejected as capitulatory to the elites. And ultimately, at the end of the day, our institutions and our values become part of a movement to remake this country and to remake Black people. Black people and their institutions are the most democratic institutions in this country, and they must be deployed at this time.
When you look at, say, for example, Richard Allen and the AMEs, he was born, I think, in 1831. Daddy Grace was born in. No, he died. I'm sorry.
No, Richard Allen was not. Richard Allen was born in the 18th century.
He died in 18. I'm sorry. He died in 1831.
Yes. Okay.
Okay. And Daddy Grace was born in, I think, about 45 years later.
Okay. Yes, in the 1880s. Yes.
So as we look at the development of the United House of Prayer, the international peace mission, how do you compare and contrast, or the Moorish Science Temple? How do you compare and contrast, or do you compare and contrast the development of those institutions, say, for example, with the AME?
Well, those institutions, as I was saying, arose in the Great Migration from the South.
Right.
So they became more proletarian in their class essence. And their rituals, the way they pray, the way they would sing, the music that they would sing was different from what you would have at Mother Bethel AME Church, or even different from established Methodist and even Baptist churches that were organized before the Great Migration, before the 1920s and 1930s. So you get that difference. But I think the key thing that I see is a difference of class origin,
Okay.
class loyalty, and I use the word a proletarian class consciousness. And a lot of times people dismiss religion. I'm certain that many mainline Black churches would not, and members of those churches would not feel necessarily comfortable in the United House of Prayer for All People, where they celebrate life, they celebrate Black people, and they play trombones and tubas, or they might not feel comfortable with the Nation of Islam or with Prophet Cherry, who would proclaim that the white man is the devil and hated by God, and that they, in fact, were Jews. But, you know, this was something completely new to Black people and in the religious, theological, political landscape of the country. These organizations, these churches, for instance, Daddy Grace's Peace Mission, which gave out food regularly to the poor and working class in Harlem, New York, in Philadelphia, South Philly and North Philadelphia, almost reflecting something like a communistic ethos, a sharing of wealth, a sharing of things. This was quite different from American theology, especially, let us say, of white theologians like Reinhold Niebuhr, who were connected and tied to the American liberal ethos. These organizations of Black people, any of those that I mentioned, have this common pattern of addressing the needs and problems of the Black working class and the Black proletariat. And they were successful. And that is why when Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks and Ralph Abernathy and Vernon Johns and others in Montgomery decided that they would fight against the system of racial segregation on buses and other public institutions, Black people trusted the church as a primary organization of resistance. They knew the church because the church was vital to the Black social system, in this case in Montgomery. But then, if you came to Philadelphia, people in Philadelphia recognized what they were doing in Montgomery because it's a similar social system. And so for churches to thrive at that time among Black people, they had to be on the side of freedom, of the collective freedom of Black people. That is what we are attempting to understand, and using Du Boisian sociology in studying this life world, in studying this social system today, with all of the ravages of deindustrialization, of criminalization, and so on. By studying these organizations, can we better understand the capacity of Black people to resist?
When you say using Du Boisian sociology, if you could explain that to those that might not understand that reference.
Yeah, well, Du Bois does sociology in order to understand the capacity of Black people to struggle. Du Boisian sociology, even with the Philadelphia Negroes, certainly with the souls of Black folk, and certainly with the book of essays, Dark Water, Du Bois is always asking the question, how capable of are Black people of fighting for themselves? what is their capacity for self-determination, and what makes them different from white people. Arthur Fawcett by the 1940s is building upon Du Bois and saying, look at these religious institutions. They enhance the capacity of Black people because they do not appeal as white churches do to the individual. Their appeal is, or their program, their outlook addresses the collective good, the collective freedom of Black people. And that's a very important thing. In fact, Du Bois talked about Black people being a nation within a nation. At other times, he called it a world within a world. But however you define it, it suggests that civilizationally, that is, in the overall sense of how a group views themselves and the world and the future, in a civilizational sense, Black people are distinct and different from the white majority of this country. However, and I think this is important, something like 20% of white Americans in one or another way identify with the Black social system and the civilizational values that define Black people. And there's a lot of evidence for this. I think the civil rights movement produced heroic white people who were prepared to die because of their identification with the civil rights movement and the Black social system. I think this is more robust, more strongly, there's more evidence for this today. 20% of white people, 20% will never side with Black people, and that middle of 60% could go either way. However, that 20% of white people will be the most important part because they, along with the vast majority of Black people, in a society so divided and fragmented as this one is, they can be qualitatively the decisive force.
That's your MAGA crew. That's your MAGA crew supporting Trump.
Pardon me?
That's your MAGA crew supporting Trump.
Yeah, and MAGA is unstable.
Right. Well,
Very
it's now.
unstable.
Yeah, it is now, yes.
Yes, very unstable.
Mm-hmm.
And that's part of the crisis of Trump. And that's why he has to perform as he does, and pretty much lie about a lot of things. Everything got better the moment he took office. Suddenly, he's God-man, he's Superman.
He invented sliced cheese.
Yeah, right. And other things. But,
sliced bread.
Yeah. But the fact of the matter is that large parts of the country, even of MAGA,
mm-hmm.
are breaking from him. And I think part of the evidence of this is Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Absolutely.
Who is on the other side of so many questions from Trump, even though she was one of the most important supporters of Trump. I think, and the polls are off on a lot of this. I think Trump has lost the young vote that voted for him, mainly not because of Charlie Kirk, but mainly because of the student encampments and their utter disgust at what they saw happening in Gaza and the identification of Kamala Harris and Joe Biden with that. Now, and of course, the anti-war claim that Trump made, that he was an anti-war president. Well, he's not that. And we are in a fluid moment. The most stable group in American society politically are Black people. Now, that might come as a great surprise to a lot of people. But once you do the right kind of sociology, it becomes very apparent that it is the values of Martin Luther King, it is the values of the Black freedom movement that can win the day. And Martin Luther King warning the nation, where do we go from here, chaos or community? In this moment, it seems like the nation has chosen chaos. But that does not mean that chaos cannot evolve into a new kind of community, in a new questioning. And I think when you put the polling numbers together with what we see from our sociological studies and observation, and by this, when I say the sociology of the Black church, we go to the Black church. I grew up in the Baptist church. And so we are saying that, yes, chaos is all about us. Crisis is everywhere, uncertainty. And for most people, the American landscape is a dark and tragic landscape. And this is for Blacks and whites, especially at the working class level. When will it break? Now, of course, many people will choose violence, and we see that. We saw it last Sunday and last weekend. Many white people choose violence because they themselves had not chosen community. They chose chaos, and now the chaos has engulfed them to the extent that they see no way out other than violence. I predict that political violence will increase, that it will be both at the elite level, and we've not seen it fully at the elite level, but definitely the people versus the elite, the people versus corporate America, health insurance companies and executives. This will increase. Black people remain that stable political force that provides a cultural, civilizational, and religious alternative for the white world. And many of them will find their ways to Black people as the final shelter from the storm of uncertainty and, again, chaos.
The shelter from the storm of uncertainty. We are in it, but not of it, is what I hear you saying. And that, Jonathan Soul, thank you very much for that $10 super sticker. The Black church is no longer useful, should be replaced by food co-ops, small businesses, and homeschools. Well, I would say that the co-op should be held at the local church. Thank you. Just go down to St. Petersburg and Pastor Clarence Williams. The small businesses should be developed in the church, and not home schools but church schools. Tony Monteiro.
Yeah, I mean, it is. I mean, one does not negate the other. The church remains the basic organization of Black people. You can't get around it. The church or the mosque, for that matter.
Right.
And you just can't get around it. And if you wish to see the most organized part of Black people, you have to go to a church. Now, you might not agree with everything they say, because you might be interpreting it from the outside and from the surface. But get below the surface and try to understand what Black people are saying, either in the United House of Prayer for All People or in Prophet Cherry's church. You go to them and you see something similar. You see that the gods that they pray to are gods of truth, beauty, and freedom. Very simply. Now, how the language And the ritual of that differs from what many of us would call revolutionary ideas. But I think the Black church has a proven potentiality, as we saw with the civil rights movement, as we saw in the 1930s with Father Divine feeding the poor and the homeless, as we saw with the Nation of Islam, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know how you get around it. Now, has the Black church lost some authority over the last, let us say, 20 years, 25 years? Definitely.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a result of many of the choices made by the leaders of these churches, in particular, turning their churches over to politicians who mainly use the churches and their members.
I would say also, to a point that you just made a little earlier, I'm not sure if it was Howard Thurman or if it was Reverend Cohn who said, this comes to my mind as you were talking about the theology that is articulated in Cherry's church. If your theology is not focused on your liberation, you are wasting your time.
Absolutely. That's what churches are faced with. And we're not talking about the prosperity gospel church.
I was going there next. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Well, wait, hang on. Before you go there, Kevin Baptist, thank you for that $5 super sticker. Dr. M, would you say first and foremost that revolution must begin with intellectual foundation?
I say so, but not alone. The intellectuals have to be fused with the people, with ordinary people. And then you have these organic intellectuals in churches. We find that that in many cases, pastors are also intellectuals, like King, for example, or Abernathy,
Mm-hmm.
or James Lawson, a great intellectual and a pastor.
Mm-hmm.
But then they have, they're kind of intellectuals whose sole function is to think and write and analyze. But when you bring the two together, it's an unbelievable force. And we have to find ways to do that and perfect as revolutionaries. And I'm speaking definitely as a revolutionary, as revolutionaries, to fuse the people and ideas, to be a part of the people, the slow, often messy work of the education of people and the education of the intellectuals. This is the task before us. We are in times where we can no longer rely upon the ideas of let us go back to the pre-Trump period in American politics. We're not going back to that because the country is forever changed. The opportunity, given the sharp contradictions among white folk and the deep contradictions at the level of the elite class, given that, and they're not going to recover. The people must decide. What do we do? Like you got the shutdown of the government. It is a failure on both sides, and that's the way people see it. How could this happen? What allowed this to happen? And so the crisis of legitimacy, where the people don't trust the government anymore, is well upon us. And so we must decide, what do we do? As Du Bois put it, whither now and why? What do we do? And it is not to go in a corner and get in a fetal position and pout. We must act. We must think. We must go among the people.
RLG, we must go among the people. New member, thank you very much for joining the people. greatly appreciate you becoming a new member. Now to the Prosperity Ministries.
Okay.
And, initially, I remember the first time I went to one. Someone that I knew was having an event at this church in Southeast DC. I had never heard of it. And when I got to the parking lot and saw all the Benzes and I was just driving this raggedy Volvo station wagon, and there was a reserved place parking spot right next to the front door. It said reserved for pastor, and parked in that space was a beige or cream colored Rolls-Royce Corniche convertible. And I said, where in the world am I? And then I walked in, and they had all these huge Sony Trinitron monitors and all of this polished brass, and the pastor's wife had on a diamond ring that looked like a 27-inch TV screen.
Mm-hmm.
And so finally I turned to a buddy of mine. I said, man, what is this? And he said, oh, you ain't hip to the Prosperity Ministries? I said, I guess I ain't prospering. Anyway, it's a fraud.
Yeah.
It's a Ponzi. It's a fraud. Tony.
And most of them have been financed by white evangelicals and Pentecostalists. Just in essence, the difference between the prosperity gospel and the freedom gospel is that the prosperity gospel tries to substitute freedom with money making.
Black capitalism.
Yeah, black capitalism or capitalism.
Right.
Not just black, but capitalism. They are ideologically the most backward, and so on. But I still think that the strongest ideological force among black churchgoers is freedom and solidarity. Most churchgoers and most people that finance and support these churches, many of which I have mentioned, are from the black working class and even the poor, who find a way to finance and support their churches. This is not the case with these huge mega churches that have outside donors and often Zionists who finance them because they recognize that such a gospel diffuses the fight, the necessary fight for freedom.
Political activism.
Yeah.
And in fact, I want to unpack that a little more. Sandra Hearn, thank you very much for that $20 super sticker. Tony, what I just thought about is, and I greatly appreciate the contributions that all of you all are making to the program, but I've now just realized the flaw in my game. I need a jet. Yeah. Like a lot of these prosperity ministers, when they tell their congregations, oh, you know what? I need a jet. And then all of a sudden, man, all this money starts pouring in. And even, who was it? Might have been Creflo Dollar. I don't need a jet. I need a new jet. I need a bigger jet. So maybe I need to change my appeal and my plea and start asking people to help me buy a jet. Maybe that, I don't know. Anyway, it's interesting that you mentioned the contribution and the support of the Zionists, because they understand that this diffuses the political aspirations and the political organization that the church could and should be involved in, instead of buying a pastor a new jet.
Yeah, and the ideological independence and self-determination by Black institutions. We expect, most Black people expect, not all, but most, expect their churches to address the problems of their community. And they want a pastor who can think for himself or herself. And that's always been the attractiveness of the Black church. If in Montgomery, Alabama in 1955, you had only prosperity gospel being taught, you would never have had the Montgomery bus boycott, because freedom is taken off the table. Capitulation to white supremacy is the order of the day. And therefore, prosperity gospel, there has two foundations: that if you can't get rich in this world, just hold on until you die, you get rich in the next world.
Mine will come by and by.
Yes.
No, let the congregation say amen. Robert Brown, thank you very much for that super sticker. Greatly appreciate. He's going to help me buy my jet.
Okay.
So I'm glad you brought up that the focus of the church is to address the issues in the community, because when you talk about the United House of Prayer, the International Peace Mission, the Moorish Science Temple, I've always seen those congregations more local focused and based than nationally focused, and particularly when it relates to politics. Am I missing it, or are they more locally focused and based?
Well, I think it's both. I think they're locally focused. I mean, the people come from local communities with local problems. But when you connect these as networks all across the country, then it reflects a national reality. Now, there are reasons for people to be critical of my perspective of even these churches. Have they lost that which brought them into existence? Is there still a fire? Is there still a confidence that they can be agents of profound transformation of this country and indirectly of the world? That's the big question. We don't know. We just don't know. However, if you look at our history, one could conclude that the capacity is there. Whether it is mobilized for the purpose of progress is a whole nother question. Now, I think it's beneficial. Sometimes a crisis and bad times produces something good. The crisis of the Democratic Party, in part, is a crisis of their having lost trust and legitimacy from Black people. Black people are walking away from them. The 2024 election is a great evidence of that if you read it properly. The Democrats made every kind of mistake they could because of arrogance. For example, they should have gotten Biden out of there much sooner. Biden should have gotten out of there much sooner. He is a victim of his own arrogance.
Sure.
Kamala Harris was not the candidate for that time or this time. I don't care what you think of her, and I don't think badly of her. She just wasn't the right person. But it was late in the game. They had to patch up a sinking ship. However, the crisis of the Democratic Party, its mistakes, its inability to unite itself as a party, even to oppose Trump, has produced an opportunity for Black people in their institutions, their churches, their other institutions, their communities, to say, now we must think anew. We must think differently. We must separate the fake from the real.
On your point about Kamala, because Biden waited so long to get out, the middle of July, none of the other viable candidates wanted to take that hit. Because you only get to lose. Rarely do you get to lose twice. Usually you only get to lose once. Gavin Newsom wasn't going to jump in at that late date and risk losing. The governor of Michigan, whose name has escaped me at the moment, she wasn't. They were not going to try to land that jet on no runway. And Joe Biden, for all intents and purposes, left them no runway, and they had no message.
Well, they had other options. They could have had an open convention, a kind of a limited primary system.
Right.
Where,
in fact, that's what James Carver was advocating early in July.
Yeah.
James Carver was saying, don't anoint her.
Yeah.
We need to figure out a truncated process so that the outcome is the result of a process, not of anointing a person.
That's right. And they have not recovered from those mistakes.
Correct. They have no message.
Pardon me?
And they have no message.
Well, they have no message because they are divided over the 2024 election. How can they have a message? And then, if you think Kamala Harris is weak, well, what do you say about Hakeem Jeffries? He is very weak. He cannot articulate a clear political vision.
No.
And he is more anti-Trump than he is pro the masses of people. But that would require a radical break from the ways that the Democrats have been doing business since Bill Clinton.
Don't tell me what you're against. Tell me what you're for.
Right.
I know Donald Trump is a clown. He tells me that every day. I don't need you, whoever candidate you are, to tell me he's a clown. What I need you to do is explain to me how you're going to help me have health insurance for my family, educate my children, and put food on the table and keep my job. Yeah, that's what I need to know.
Yeah, it's very simple. It's very, very simple, I think. But you have to have courage. First of all, the cost of empire and the cost of the military to support the empire, that has to be taken off the table. $1 trillion a year for the military budget?
Oh, and you can't back genocide. Genocide is off the table as well.
Well, that's part of the cost of empire.
Right.
You know, the wars, interminable wars from the early 2000s up until now, that's one way to go from a military industrial economy to a peace economy. Say it, Hakeem Jeffries. If you are interested, you know, learn a little bit from Mamdani in New York. Do the unusual, you know, stop being a P word. Stand up. You know, and, you know, the other thing, you know.
Well, he can't stand up because the weight of AIPAC on his back is too heavy.
My point.
And the same thing with Gregory Meeks.
Absolutely.
And the same thing with, who's the other guy? Got a Latino name in New York.
Torres.
Richie Torres.
Yeah. No, yes, absolutely. And
hence my piece, he who pays the piper calls the tune.
That's right. And that goes for the Congressional Black Caucus pretty much to a man or woman. They cannot solve the problems of this country. They cannot lead the people. They cannot lead Black people. Black people seek radical solutions, what would be considered more towards social democracy, a political and social system, interestingly and ironically, that would look more like China than like the traditional American way of doing business. A social contract with the people, a plan to realize it and to fight for it. The base of the Democratic Party is right when they're angry that the leaders of the Democratic Party don't fight. Well, they never have. They never have. Certainly since what's his name, Bill Clinton.
And that's one of the reasons why I think Trump took this whole government shutdown issue to the degree that he did, because he expected Schumer and Jeffries to fold. And who's to say that they won't?
Yeah.
I'm surprised they didn't Tuesday night like they did Schumer did the last time. But I think Trump, when he played the card of, I'm going to fire people if you shut this thing down, he was expecting momentary capitulation. And it hasn't come yet. And I pray that it doesn't, but it won't surprise me if it does.
Well, yeah, I hear you. And besides, the question of healthcare and the expanded ACA or Obamacare that happened during the period of COVID. But the Democrats are unprepared to do what has to be done. Of course, all of this is happening in a moment when the center has not held. The vital center of American politics has not held. And you have two warring political parties with the American people still having not decided where they will come down in this thing. And that will be the deciding question. When the American people decide, through protests, through strikes, through, of course, Trump is going after the government workers' unions because they didn't support him and will never support him, have criticized him. But that's a challenge to them. What do you do? How do you reach out to the masses of people? Because, the two parties shut the government down, but what about even when the government comes back? If the workers decide upon a general strike, that they have demands that have to be met. Suppose, even in a weakened trade union movement, that if the federal government workers act, that other unions will act alongside of them. Okay, you would say, hey man, you thinking in a utopian way, a pie in the sky way. But how else to answer this question? Do you just wait for these two parties to come to an agreement? The elite politicians have failed the people. The people must act to save themselves.
Final point to that. What did Sean Fain say last January when two Januaries ago, when he endorsed Joe Biden? He said the UAW is endorsing Joe Biden, but the rank and file are going to vote for Donald Trump.
That's right. That's right. And so what does that say when the union leadership does not reflect their membership?
There you go. They're on the wrong ship.
That's right. And
this Sandra Hearn, thank you very much for that $2 super sticker. Greatly appreciate it. So Tony, 2 minutes. What do you want the audience to walk away from this conversation having a better understanding of?
Well, I think what I've been saying the whole time. I think we have to once again discover the spirit of struggle, the spirit of resistance. We cannot rely upon the political classes, the political elite, no matter how, quote, liberal they talk, to resolve this crisis. It will require that we go back to something like the civil rights movement, like the philosophy of Martin Luther King and James Lawson and Diane Nash and others, Ella Baker and so on, that the questions of the people must be resolved by actions of the people. We must rediscover that. That is the only hope at this time. We cannot expect things to get politically better. They will only worsen. And who is to say that we are not on the cusp of a huge recession? Already the signs of the economy slowing down, of new jobs being produced slowing down to almost unbelievable numbers. And of course, you take a recession along with this unbelievable inflation, producing stagflation, that might be enough to break the back of the political system itself.
Well, and so long as they don't once again try to change the definition of recession, that's a conversation. And I think, let me thank again Sandra Hearn. Another $10. Well, I'm closer to getting my jet. Sandra, thank you very much for that $10 super sticker, and I'm closer to. And Tony, when I get my jet, you're gonna be one of the first ones riding on it.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Hey man, that's what we do for little people. That's what we do. Hey brother, seriously man, thank you so much as always. Your insights, your analysis, your tolerance of my foolishness. I greatly appreciate it, man. And as always, look forward to having you back.
Thank you. I hope it was helpful, Will.
Man, as always.
Okay.
As always. Appreciate it, bro.
Okay.
Folks, thank you all so much for listening to the Connecting the Dots podcast with me, Dr. Wilmer Leon. New episode tomorrow. Can't remember who my guest is. Please follow, subscribe, leave a review, share the show. Follow us on social media. You'll find all the links below in the show description. Remember, this is where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge, because talk without analysis is just chatter, and we don't chatter here on Connecting the Dots. See y'all tomorrow. Have a blessed remainder of your day. Until then, I am Dr. Wilmer Leon. Peace. I'm out.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.